to make, what can we do to make this long-term plan start off in the right way so that we get the future we want to see. Who wants to start? Go, Imogen.
Yeah, I would suggest that there be nominated parcels of land that are be allocated as community or collective housing developments for each location and area where there's regeneration occurring. And then it's marked and zoned for that, nothing else can happen other than that. And it's done strategically and tactically the way it's thought through to allocate the land.
Thank you. I said I'd take us on a journey, so I think it's about adopting a posture around giving effect to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So whatever that looks like for us, and so I'm not a resident here, but if I just put my hat on for Māori in general, it's what is that posture Tauranga City Council, its communities will take to say, actually this is how we want to do things in respect of the treaty. And so that's not just the modern principles of partnership, protection and participation, but it goes a lot deeper into what is the whakapapa of tauranga? How does the whakapapa of tauranga get celebrated and show up in everything that the council is going to embark on? So whether that's nominated parcels of land, what's the engagement strategy with mana whenua? Because there were people who occupied these places and spaces before the current people are in the community. So I think it's what is the posture? And I think that's a really good question for us here to ask ourselves. Kia ora.
Yeah, I think probably looking to invest in ways that achieve results. You know, like I think Alice said something earlier that there's been all this investment and all these grants, and what are the actual results, and how can you measure those results as well? So making sure that when you're spending, you know, we're talking billions of dollars. It's easy to say billions, but that's 1,000 million, and that's a lot of money, and it can go a long way. So making sure that there's, you know, I guess, the accurate reporting, understanding what the problems really are, who are the people that should be and shouldn't be involved, and then making sure that investment is spent wisely and that there's actually results.
Kia ora everyone. The way I think about this, I kind of take it back to real principles and think about actually what's the most important thing for us here, and I kind of take it back to the environment. Without the environment, we actually have nothing. We don't have any communities, we don't have any investment. So if you then make the environment at the heart of what we actually do, and I think, you know, we've got a great opportunity with climate change and the government's kind of commitments to what we're doing there. So if we commit to being a carbon neutral, climate centric, you know, friendly city, actually that looks after, you know, their water quality, your harbours, it talks about things like housing and intensification and everything else at the same time. So I kind of think about the environment and that climate change and starting kind of there. And from there, the second one is actually, you know, it's all about community wellbeing. So actually what's most important for communities? And I can take it back to, again, first principles. You think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Actually, what is it? It's clean water, it's shelter. So it's like, actually, where is our commitment that says, actually, we're a rich enough region, everyone should be in warm, secure, healthy houses. Look after that. Look after those key criteria there. You know, why are we investing in roads, yet we're not willing to invest in community housing? You know, for me, I'd rather have my neighbours living in a nice, safe, warm house and a few potholes in the road. So I think it means, you know, we need to get some commitments there. You know, I think if you look at the commitments to the treaty, it really kind of supports those kind of areas as well. And if you look after the environment, look after the housing and your people, the economic side of things and the investment side of things is going to start looking after itself as well. So, you know, I think we can commit to the treaty, commit to the environment, commit to the climate change approach, and also do something around housing. And a lot of those downstream consequences about mental health, you know, we've got a massive peer issue here in the Western Bay of Plenty, will start looking after themselves as well.
Does anybody want to add to anything anybody else has said in the panels?
And I talk too much.
Yeah, just to add on to what you mentioned, Alistair, for me it's around looking at our priority populations. Too often our priority populations are our vulnerable communities. So if we change the narrative and we start talking about priority populations, if we can solve it for our priority populations, we'll solve it for all of us. Kia ora.
That's good.
Oh, sorry. Do you want to take the
I was just going to add it quickly about this land situation. So in the break, people asked me a bit about like what are the key barriers, and one of them obviously is land. I've discussed offered an opportunity for how land can be solved in one way. Another way that land could be solved is through the inclusionary zoning being implemented in the area, whereby every development above a certain value or amount of homes being built would have a proportion put aside, ideally into a land trust, and that would then be a requirement that it be held in perpetuity for social and affordable housing. So it's another way land could be secured to achieve affordable and social housing in this area.
Can I just add to that? Housing is one of my passions, and I think it's a fundamental change in the thinking. So I think that 50, 100 years ago, housing was seen as a true community asset, an intergenerational community asset. Now housing's over the last 20 or 30 years, using the US-centric approach, is seen as an individual issue. And so if we kind of take it back and go, actually, what are key community assets we want to look after here? Actually, for me, if you actually start thinking housing is one of those, actually that starts changing your thinking about what we're going to do and how we're going to apply, thinking of it as a community asset rather than individual responsibility.
Thank you all for being here. My name's Emma. I run a community site called Clear the Air, Mount Maunganui. Everything that you've brought up can be looked at in Mount Maunganui. If we look at the footprint of the Mount area, an immense amount of land is taken up by the Mount industrial area, of which there's a lot of heavy industry, which we believe shouldn't be there anymore. It's poisoning mana whenua down at Whareroa Marae, who have been systematically ring-fenced by these heavy industries and poisoned. Their kaumātua dying 10 to 15 years earlier than ours. So we've got the environmental issues here. The issue with the economic side, and I'd like to see some work done on this in the long-term plan, we need to show opportunity cost that is taken up by this land. We need to show through the economics that this does not make any sense. The regional council is 54% invested in the port, so they rely so heavily on the port's financial contribution, but we could show them that that land, some of it's privately owned, some of it is also by the city council, but we could show them economically that it makes more sense, solve our housing crisis, solve our land crisis, help the environmental crisis that we're facing down there, the land, water and air. The industrial area is a polluted airshed, so all of these issues that we're talking about today, we've got hundreds of hectares of land in Mount Maunganui that could be turned around. In terms of the treaty issues, I'm sure Whareroa would like to look at that. We've got an airport there that probably should be their land. I can't speak to it obviously, but I'd love that to be brought to the table because I'm sure they would like to do something much better than having an airport there. So I just wanted to say, if we could all think, when we're thinking about the long-term plan submission, be really looking at Mount Maunganui as a case study for how we can bring all of these amazing ideas you've talked about today to the table, and especially showing the economics. Alistair, that we can actually show them investment-wise, we can do a lot better than having containers and logs stacked up on hundreds of hectares of land. That's all I'm saying.
Look, I completely agree. The economics behind that airport located there for the value of that kind of land just doesn't kind of work at all. I think the other thing they forget is that the investment world is changing very, very rapidly in terms of if you see where the growth of investment's coming from, it's very much, it was responsible, ethical, now it's looking at sustainable. And actually it's looking at true sustainable, which is actually businesses and companies that, look after the environment, the community and the people and actually fully cost all their downstream impacts, etc. at the same time. So, this is a trend that's not going to, doesn't matter what they do, it's going to happen anyway. And so if they can start building a city or region that kind of understands, embraces that, there's a huge amount of capital investment there's lots of capital in the world looking for a home, but it's actually started, the demand is for actually a home that's really sustainable now because that's, investors like us, that's what we're investing into.
Any other points? Yeah, Vanessa?
I'm very aware I'm not from here. And I do want to acknowledge that wherever the interest bases might be, it's engaging authentically with the iwi of this area. So for us, that's Tauranga Moana, Ngāti Pukenga and Ngaitirangi. And if I was to put my university hat on, it's what might a joined up research agenda start to look like? Because yes, there's long-term planning, but when we're talking about the future spaces that the community wants to see, I do think an interwoven research agenda of some kind, not necessarily with Waikato University. I mean, it could be wherever the experts are. So if the expertise is in in the South Island, then have those authentic arrangements to be in the university spaces or the CRIs, wherever it is. But take the people of the places with you. So if we're talking about the Mount, making sure that the mana whenua of those areas are included and they have a voice in whatever the plans or the research agendas might look like. And then when they come into systems like the university, we can put the other wrappers around. But often what we can't do is bring the iwi to the table at the last minute.
Yeah, I think probably, from hearing those numbers, 25%, 35% engagement in local politics, like it's just such a small percentage of people. And then if local iwi are not involved, like how do we get these people to have a voice and to, encourage people that, especially the democracy side of it, is actually sort of, people who actually want to get involved with it. And I think this probably comes from just the tiredness of people speaking up and then nothing happening, right? So people are like, okay, we want this done, and then just nothing sort of happens. And that's, I think it's obviously that's what's engaging, disengaging people.
Do you think, I'm just going to ask a question, sorry Jenny, can I ask a question? Do you think that we've loaded our council with too much responsibility for actually making the changes that we need?
Someone's got to make decisions, right?
Look, yeah, I think everyone's got a role to play here. Everyone in this room, everyone in this community is a leader, and whether they're part of an organisation or individually, and things like housing and climate change, we can't just rely on central government, regulation or local government, initiatives. So I think we all have got to play there, but the councils have the ability to create a much better framework for us to kind of lead in as well. And for an investor like us, if we don't see the kind of council leading in the stage, we've got plenty of other places and opportunities to invest. So if we see something fantastic happening in Rotorua, we'll invest there. If we just see a business as usual plan located in Tauranga, we'll take our investment money somewhere else. So they do have a key role to play, but I kind of argue everyone has a role to play. That the crisis is that big, everyone needs to get involved.
Sorry, Julian was first. I was going to ask, as a putting a matchmaker's hat on, about the two in the middle with Vanessa and Matt. Do you think that there is some relationship that you could form between you, that being new innovation and research?
Professionally.
I was going to say they'll make beautiful babies.
Yeah, I guess, that's super important. I know what you mean. And you're right, coming from an entrepreneur's perspective, you have these ideas, right? And you want to do them, and everyone asks me, oh, well, then why aren't you doing it? It's I don't have $1 million cash in my pocket. Come on, if those, like you say, that sort of that matchmaking network, if those can be sort of leveraged in a way where you are able to align your goals, I think that, absolutely, there's no reason why anybody, specifically, even in the commercial space, wouldn't want to work with someone in a research space or in a grant space or an investment space, for sure. So, and like you say, and touching on what Alice said before, is at some point, someone's going to have to do something. And the thing is, do we do it now when we've got the foresight to look forward 5 years? Or do we do it when we've got 6 months because the water level's too high? When are we going to act on this? Is probably my sort of driving goal on this. But yeah.
That's a good question. My short answer is that there's a lot of good science that's been done in Tauranga, Western Bay Plenty in general, and so how to tie into what's already happening is probably a key space to start. So I think about robotics, and I think about apples and kiwi fruit and what's happening in Katikati here. There's an innovation hub. They're already well connected into our university. They're also well connected into iwi here. So it's starting with who do we know possibly, what's already happening on the ground, which is really me looking back at these ones here, reflecting into your space to say, well, what's already happening and where are the connections that need to be made to push things forward in the way that we're talking about. So there is a lot already happening. It's just a case of how do we connect those up more. And then what's the process to unlock additional funding, but with research, just making sure that we're all aware, research has a long burn. It's not something that just happens overnight. That's why people go to consultants.
And I think, you've seen a couple of great ideas today about housing and, what you're looking there. I think we need to start thinking about actually how we support those ideas in a different way. So if I think those are like mission-based ideas. Traditional private equity VC kind of world is like, we want a 20-30% kind of return out of these ideas, and it's all profit kind of focused. And the owners are like, okay, I'll put a whole bunch of sweat equity in for the first 5 years, but then I'm hoping to make $5 million out of it. Actually, but there's some great ideas out there that are really mission-based, that actually the profit wants to get invested back into those ideas, and they struggle to kind of get that funding at the start. And so we need to kind of think about how we're going to do that in a different kind of way. And we're having a discussion with some other funders and some local entities here, thinking about how we can support those ideas in a different way than traditional investment organisations have. And it's the same thing with iwi, right? So, Māori organisations quite often struggle to get funding from traditional banks because they will never give away security on their land. They've already lost it once, they don't want to lose it again. So actually we need to think outside of the traditional Western capitalism kind of markets, how you invest into these opportunities, and think of doing it in a different kind of way as well. And that's what we're kind of grasping and grappling with at the moment.
This actually leads on from what you just said, Alistair, thank you. And also something you said earlier, Vanessa, which was there's a lot of things happening, but if nothing ties them together, they're just things happening. I've lived here in the Tauranga region for 7 years, so not from here with any long history. But my observation is that there are things tying things together here, but it's a systemic disease based on very capitalistic, 10x opportunities. And the thing is that it's always the same people in this room, right? And we're a minority in this city. But we've got a real power and an activator opportunity. And the question I'd have to the panel is, what do you think is the block that's the immediate opportunity, that if we could unblock that one thing, within this next period of time, what might that be, and how can the people in this room help with that?
It's a big one.
Yeah, that's a big one. I was going to say, there's no silver bullet for this, but I would argue against you that sees we're the minority in the community here. I think what's happened in the past is councils have reflected a view of the minority people that vote for them, and the developers that have their kind of ears, and their fellow kind of neighbours that get cared about traffic congestion. But I would say if we went out and took, shaped up a true, city of the future, smart city, would actually get majority acceptance from the people in Tauranga as well. So I kind of question whether we are the minority. I think maybe we're the minority in terms of that council influence. In terms of a silver bullet, look, I don't have any, except to say that I think with our council and with the commissioners that aren't elected, they're not standing again, have the ability to think a lot more longer term, which is what we need. The housing crisis took 50 years to happen. We're not going to cure it overnight. Actually, if we could agree on 3 or 4 key principles, where it doesn't matter what happens, what national government or Labour government comes in over the next 20 years, and they can politic all they like around the edges, we can start getting on top of it. So for me, actually getting that really, some of these wicked issues like climate change and housing, getting a consensus that says actually there's 3 things we're going to do each of these areas. And none of it's rocket science, I was talking before. This is all actually common basic sense. We're not building rockets to the moon, right? It's really easy to work through some of these things, but we need good leadership and hard decisions. Imogen,
Yeah, I just keep coming back to the way we do the finance sector and how much it limits and stifles, cooperatives. And the model I explained before, the finance industry doesn't separate land from building, and that's one of the key things that we'll need to change, or we finance it differently for it to be able to happen. Shimabel Equab yesterday morning said that the finance industry is racist and elitist.
And yeah, and look, you know, I completely believe, but it's even hard for me to change my thinking. So we were in discussions with Te Arawa and the First Credit Union around sort of like a Te Arawa bank, and I was looking at their return expectations, and it was sort of like 6 or 7%, or maybe 5%. I was like, that's way too low. You know, we want a 15% return. That's what kind of bank's going to get. And then I had to like actually look at myself and kind of go, actually, that's the old school kind of way of actually thinking, you know. And even though I'm kind of part of this, it's hard to train people to think in a different kind of way and go, actually, if I kind of say I want a 15% return out of this model, they'd basically be turning this, what they're proposing, into a commercial bank. Well, we know that doesn't work for the Te Arawa people now. So actually, we need to start thinking of, you know, changing that paradigm around.
In terms of the question, what's the one, the silver bullet as it were, I don't know here if there is some type of intergenerational plan, because we know long-term plans come around and they come and go. But if there was an intergenerational plan of 30, 40 years in the making, what does that start to look like? And so if I put my own iwi hat on for Waikato, we have an intergenerational blueprint to realise our whakatupuranga in 2050. Well, as funny as it may be, but not so funny, I'll be 80 in 2050. So when I think about all of the decisions our tribe is making for our people, I'm thinking with my 80-year-old self hat on, not my 51-year-old self hat on. And that really forces you to change the way you think about things. So I think about an intergenerational blueprint of some kind, but it has to obviously work for this area. And just, you know, knowing some of the things that we're doing, with that in mind, I was like, well, actually, what does it look like for me when I'm 80? How do I want my life to be? And then it forces us to think quite differently about the decisions we're making.
And I think Kiwis are really bad at thinking, well, a lot of us anyway, long-term and intergenerationally. So, you know, we complain when a developer says, oh, we're going to build a mixed tenure, mixed typology development in our subdivision, because we're like, oh, that's going to lower the prices of our houses. But we forget to think that in 30 years' time, we're going to be 80 years old, and we might want to move from our 4-bedroom house in Papamoa, stay in the same community with our kids, and move into a 2-bedroom duplex just next door. So actually, you know, I think European Kiwis in particular think really short term. So I think, you know, for me it's the same kind of message actually, thinking really long term for the Commission, it's intergenerational. You know, I think it might be Ireland that actually they have that test, is actually, is this going to benefit our children and our children's children? And having that test in place actually makes a lot of sense as well.
I think one thing is, you know, we really value, I mean, when you ask what's the value of living in the Bay of Plenty, right? Like, people will probably point to how much their house is worth. But like, there's so much more value here. Like, it's a beautiful place to live. The beach is awesome. Sort of land, you know, the area. So I think when you're looking at a return, you know, from an investment perspective, you're like, okay, we might not make 15%, but we're going to build these beautiful homes, or we're going to build this beautiful city. And you know, there's maybe some intangible value that maybe isn't considered when thinking about these investments.
And we do survey the community, and the community's told us the number one reason they live in the Bay of Plenty is the natural environment. And actually, we can't forget about that, and that's why, you know, that's our strength, that's our asset. If we keep on coming back to that, a lot of it kind of looks after everything else.
I just want to pick up on something else to said, and he probably doesn't remember. He said it. He said City of the Future, but that belongs to Hamilton.
See, lucky I whakapapa back to Hamilton, so I was there when they did the City of the Future, and then I left.
Does anybody have any more? Glenn, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just thinking what you're talking about. Actually, I'll make one comment, Alistair, which is...
Glenn's got a lot more technical expertise in this area than I do.
Oh, no, totally back everything you say, except I think a lot of people I know, as they get older especially, have a very strong future-focused direction and long-term vision for their family, but because of, you know, neoliberal reforms and all that, they're kind of forced to thinking we need to own the land and subdivide it for the kids kind of thing. So it's just a matter of transferring that to a more communal focus. But what I was going to say was the City Futures project, which the council have said to us they don't want to lead, they want to have, you know, for the people to say what the future of the city is about. To me, that's where a lot of what you guys are talking about should go. And I'm a bit concerned that we're rolling out a massive $4.6 billion investment strategy for the next decade at massive cost, huge increases in debt, massive cost. It's not sustainable at all. And so we're going to lock that in, tie up all the capital that residents have, maybe not, trusts, but certainly ratepayers are going to be pushed to the absolute limit. They're already paying the highest rates in the country here. And then we're going to go, in the years to follow, let's figure out what we want to do. And I think it's absolutely back to front, and I think it's locking in something which could be incredibly dangerous, that we're going to get stuck in transport plans and all sorts of housing plans out in the box to build more and more unsustainable houses and communities, and then we're going to turn around and say, actually, we don't want this, because I'm quite convinced you're right, Alistair. I think the people of Tauranga don't want what we've got, but we've got very little chance to stop it because these people are not elected.
That sounds like something you should write down and put in your submission there, Glenn. It
Well,
all sounds
well,
fantastic, but yeah,
I've
it's
talked to them about it. They're just totally closed to that possibility.
one of the challenge we have here, and like a lot of councils, I think they've lost their mandate. Actually, I think if the council came out, especially if it was under the old councillors, and said, here's our vision for the city, actually 80% of the people would say we disagree with it because they just don't like the actual council. So I can respect and understand them saying we want that to come from the community, but I'm just not entirely sure actually how they're engaging and how they're working with that to get the community's input coming through. I've been involved in a lot of council strategic planning sessions over the last 4 or 5 years, as Mary Dillon, everyone has. And you have these great ideas and visions, and it's all the same kind of stuff we're talking about now. And then it gets pushed up to the councillor level, and it's like, will this earn me votes? No. And then nothing happens. So now it should get pushed up to the commissioner level and say, actually, it's got nothing to do with votes at all. It's actually about what's doing right. And so, how do we get that input coming into the long-term plan is really important.
Question there, Alistair. Sounds like a vision is required and a vision from the people. Would that be like, I've dabbled around these circles for a while around design thinking, and there's some amazing professionals in the Bay, like amazing professionals that do this really fucking well. Would Bay Trust fund a program that was pitched to you guys to say, hey, it's going to cost $1 million to go out, survey and engage the entire, 50 or 60% of the Bay to get that vision formed?
Yeah. Look, I remember we got asked a question at our AGM a couple of years ago, and this is from Dave Donaldson, the Deputy Mayor of Rotorua, which is around actually housing and our investment into housing and our commitment to support the kind of council. And I said, the challenge we've had is that actually we have some great discussions and come up with some great ideas, and then for whatever reason it gets said no to. So we work with the staff really closely, put in a lot of hours and resource, and then it gets pushed back on. So I'd be wanting a commitment before we did something like that says, if this is what the community research says, this is what we're going to do.
They've already appointed that board, but that board is in play right now to do our city's future vision. They've said who's on it, who's controlling it.
And it's got no
And they've said
environmental
they don't want to own it.
representation.
So the issue is really, how do we get involved? That's what I think.
Mary Dillon must have an answer to that. She's knows everyone that knows everyone.
Been
That knows
engaged
everyone.
with the council in some rather yes minister-like discussions. So in relation to that, there is a sort of future strategy. We're going to forget another vision, because we haven't had one for the last, since 2007, I think, and so the vision was actually destroyed by the council that came in at that time. But there isn't that future strategy that is going on now. There is no environmental representation on that strategic group at all. And yet, we're in a position where very shortly councils are going to lose their 3 waters. When they do that, which is nearly all of their investment outside roading, which is 50% funded by central government anyway, what is the future of a council, a local body in New Zealand? And we haven't even started to think about that yet. One of the issues we've got with this 10-year plan is that the commissioners have to follow the statute. If they do not meet their deadlines, then the council cannot rate for next year. So there's no income and the whole thing falls over. That's clearly not going to happen. What we need to persuade our commissioners is that we're not in the right place. Can we look at the annual plan next year to do some very significant work that will start to turn this great big behemoth around a bit from where it's at the moment. I think
we've got some real difficulties with this year because of the time frame and the way the commissioners have been dumped in it. I think they're a really good thing for Tauranga. We needed to draw a line on what was happening, but we need to seize the opportunity and actually start enacting some of the things you guys have been talking about today, have been talked about for long enough.
And I think, you know, people struggle a little bit with vision or strategy. You know, they come up with like that vision for Hamilton City, the future, which just doesn't mean anything at all. But actually, sometimes what works really well is actually, here's 3 or 4 definitive commitments that we're giving. We're giving a commitment to the environment and climate change. We're giving a commitment to give effect to the treaty, or come up with, here's our 4 or 5 value statements. And sometimes those hold true a lot longer than a vision or a strategy. So if we could kind of say, here's the 3 or 4 things we're committing to in Tauranga, that should be intergenerational in nature. It should align really closely with kind of iwi, etc. at the same time. And those give you really good things to push your, you know, your tactics and your strategies against, and say, does this align with our commitments? No, then we need to go back and rethink about things. But yeah, no, I understand what you're saying.
And that is just the perfect segue. Thank you very much indeed, Alistair.
There's one more question, I think. Is it?
And our panel.
I was just going to...
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, g'day. I'm James Hughes. Look, I agree with what you're saying. I think while I agree that some of those vision statements are helpful, they, you know, you run the risk of just everyone going, yep, I really love the environment here. It's what, you know, I've got a vision for beautiful.
Yeah.
Like, we've got to avoid that and go, what are the investment priorities and why isn't it being delivered? And when you look at, you know, the vision's really important. Then you've got to have the legislation and the regulations that will deliver that. And at the moment, the market is so broken that all we're seeing is housing being rolled out in Papamoa, as we've all spoken about. So, but I think the challenge is, you know, everyone would probably agree, for example, that we might need more density in the CBD to bring re-liven 150 empty shops that we've currently got, to bring vibrancy, to bring all the good stuff, but there's no vehicles to deliver that. There's no, even if you enable the height limits, even if you remove all the parking, all the regulations, the market's not going to come in and build a bunch of really cool apartments because they're happy to go and build out the end of Papamoa. So we've got to look at, coming back to the question, what is the one thing you would change that's actually going right to the heart of that? Where's the money? Who's going to actually deliver that? And can we build some vehicle to deliver co-housing, to deliver really good design apartments and actually make it happen? That's my little rant.
And it's a good little rant, and it totally feeds into the next piece, which is the workshop. So first of all, please can you thank our 4 awesome panellists today for their